Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you to all participants. Thanks to Anchao for the invitation. Thanks to Gotti, Daniel Jacquet, and all those who have allowed us to participate in this conference. And also Marco Ferrari, all those that have supported us in our activities. Our presentation that I will now start. We believe it's very important because it concerns a broad topic which is difficult to present in 10 minutes. We will just give you some highlights. The title is Stratification, Amalgamation and Sedimentation of Martial Culture in Europe, and with a focus on Brescia. These three words of stratification, amalgamation, and sedimentation refer to ancient history of the city of Brescia, which is one of the main northern Italian and European cities that developed this topic. What do we mean by stratification, amalgamation, and stratification? The first concepts, stratification and amalgamation, we mean by these words this series and sequence of epochs, of periods from prehistory, which has been described by Ausilio Priuli in a very complete manner, and then coming all the way down to modern times. And so these various cultures and civilizations that followed one another communicated with one another. And so there was a kind of a melding, of mingling, what we call amalgamation, which that is an interaction that was very important in the development of martial art in Europe. These words also refer to other areas of study, to geology in a way, because the cultures that followed one another in the territory have superimposed one of the others, such as similarly to layers, and along the centuries and millennia have enabled amalgamation and sedimentation, so the creation of a cultural terrain that on which martial arts flourished, including those that are closer to us in time. It's important to note that these cultures shared some aspects, some key aspects, and this enabled their integration and combination. And we see that in the territory of Brescia is at the center of the Po Valley, in an area where peoples a number of migrations flowed into this area, and they had to share a territory that was encircled also geographically. And so they had to come to live together in a relatively small area due to geographical limitations. And so different peoples came to live together, but they share some common traits that favored their communication. For instance, these different peoples and civilizations all practiced war and martial arts. This was present in their daily life and influenced and structured society. based on the presence and the need of fighting, of combat to defend their own existence in a territory against other tribes, other civilizations. This is a common trait. And so we have a social structure where we have the producers of wealth and the warriors that defend that wealth and the priests that connect to the divine. And so there was a sacred aspect to martial art that we find also in the engravings, the rock engravings, the rock art, where we see a strong link between martial arts and sacred elements. So the function of the warrior together with the priest was to connect the cosmic order to the material order. These aspects influenced many channels, also indirectly, in such ritual aspects developed in prehistory and in the Celtic period, but also in later times, such as the Roman period, in maybe not in a conscious manner by the Romans, because the Romans were a more pragmatic culture, but we still have ritual elements. For instance, in the gladiator combat was done for entertainment of the population, but according to recent studies, they also had a ritual element of death. Death was ritualized as a sort of sacrifice that indirectly has a link with the ritual duels and sacred duels of older cultures. Here we have, for instance, an image of a gladiator fight. And in Valcamonica, we find a Ricciarius warrior. This was a special type of gladiator who had a trident and a net to capture the enemy. And at Civitate Comune, in the amphitheater, this gladiator fought no less than 23 duels and won these fights, and so he was remembered and celebrated in a tablet, and Roman culture then superimposed itself and amalgamated itself with the previous Celtic and pre-Celtic cultures and found its greatest expression in a formation combat. And here we find a difference vis-a-vis individual combat, because the greatest expression of this formation combat, we know that the soldiers, Roman soldiers, legionnaires were trained for this combat. It was development of military art, of collective combat. The link with the population with which Rome had to do in the area of Brescia. This connection occurred over a very long period. There were allied population in the territory of Brescia that provided cavalry and also barbarian populations that subsequently occupied the same territory. And these societies experienced war as a specialty linked to horseback fighting. So no more infantry fighting, but horseback fighting in the post-Roman period. Here we see an example of a Langobard warrior. And this, we can see as the influence of Asian culture. So we have this dualism. We have so the formation combat in Brescia, legionnaires. There was a legionnaire, for instance, that fought with people of the East and lost his life in Bulgaria. And the name of this soldier has been preserved. So there was an export of not only of weapons from the area of Brescia, but even of warriors that went to fight elsewhere. And we have some historical testimony of this. And then in the medieval period, we have a further stratification and amalgamation with the arrival of the Langobard warriors and their warrior traditions, which turn back to individual fight and also sacred elements, ritual elements, and Paolo Diacono about the sacrality of these warriors that wore a dog's head. They remind us of the Scandinavian tradition. So this combination, amalgamation with the Germanic elements lead us to the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, we have the first example of sedimentation of the martial art, which characterizes the territory of Brescia throughout the centuries. We see certification of all the older cultures and communication of the fight of combating led to sedimentation and maturation of martial art, which in the Middle Ages started thanks to the experiment in northern Italy of the period of the comuni, Italian comuni, and that was especially strong in northern Italy and Brescia. So the city-states, the Italian comuni of the Middle Ages, this led to horizontal sedimentation of martial art. That is, in the Roman period and the Langobard period, martial art was restricted to specific roles, the knight and the infantry and the person on foot. But in the comuni period, this horizontal stratification in society expands because the entire community of the city-state is involved because the city itself became a whole community, and the role of the warrior was distributed throughout the population. All the population was involved in learning martial arts, and it was not restricted to a warrior caste. And it was very interesting. We find in Brescia in this period demonstration of this widespread knowledge of martial arts, which enabled the city to become prominent both in Italy and internationally. This example is the Battle of the Mala Morte, of the Bad Death. At the end of the 12th century, Brescia was attacked by neighboring city-states, including Bergamo, that attacked militarily Brescia. And during this battle, the city of Brescia showed that it was able to face up to neighboring powers that were perhaps stronger than Brescia, but thanks to the involvement of the entire population and this spread of martial art, the cavalry and the infantry were able to resist the attack. And the fascinating aspect of this battle is that the cavalry was at one point discouraged because the fight was turning against it, was retreating, but then, and the infantry, of course, could not have resisted alone. But then the knights, the knights on horseback felt ashamed that they were abandoning the infantry, and so they returned to the battlefield and they reversed the battle, and they managed to secure victory. And this is also an example of the identity of the community, of this sense of community, of fighting together. And in later periods, at the end of the period of the comuni, where the different kind of government developed, which was the signoria in the late Middle Ages. Here too, Brescia maintained a leading role, and the new war activity and martial arts in Brescia society was represented by a leader of war. In this case, it was the signore, that is the leader at the end of the 14th century, Testa, who thanks to his skill and also financial resources, was able to set up a cavalry of 3,000 knights based in Brescia. And this lord was an ally of and subordinate of the Venetian Republic. So this development then led to the subsequent period, that is sedimentation, that led to full flourishing of martial art in Brescia as a European example in the Renaissance, when all this experience that developed through amalgamation and stratification flourished in the early Renaissance, where we see a technical and warfare evolution on all respects that enabled Brescia to develop specific skills. So in the end, martial art, in the sense of man prepared on a physical and spiritual plane, then we have a new era of firearms. So the Brescia also developed firearms, which replaced in a way the idea of the warrior. And Brescia became one of the first producers of firearms in the world. So martial art let's say, based on physical prowess, was replaced by technical prowess in the development and the production of firearms in Brescia.